Hello everybody, and welcome to today's masterclass. Today we're going to be talking about building your artist identity, something that's really, really important for artists. You know, when I think about successful artists over the last few years, they got really, really strong brand identities, but it's such a difficult thing to get a grasp on. So my name's Alex. I'm the CEO and founder at Unheard. And for those that don't know, Unheard is a digital marketing platform that helps artists reach their most valuable fans. So we automate the process of marketing, making it really, really easy for you to reach those fans that are going to stream and consume your music. Today, a few bits of housekeeping before I dive in. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a 30 to 40 minute conversation with our expert panelists, who I'll hand over to in a second to do a quick introduction. Then we'll leave it open at the end for 10 minutes of questions. So if you guys do have any questions, please stick them in the chat and we will come to those at the end of this webinar. What we will also do is we will share this webinar with you so you can rewatch it via email, and we will also pop this onto YouTube. So it'll be really accessible once we have completed today. So as a quick introduction to the webinar, we're going to be covering a few key topics. You know, I mentioned before about building an artist identity, and we're going to be touching on what is an artist identity, and then diving into how you can build that, how you can create that compelling narrative to start to thread storytelling through your artist journey. And I'm very, very excited to welcome three amazing guests who are absolutely a masterclass at building artist brands. So I'm going to hand it over to them to give a quick introduction. First, we've got Breyner. So Breyner, just handing it over to you. Breyner is the culture director at Blackstar.
Hi everyone. So yeah, just as Alex said, I'm the innovation and culture director of Blackstar, and I've got about 15 years experience working across the music industry. Started off as an A&R scout, and then just randomly kind of just found out social media as that was kind of burgeoning when I was still younger in my days, and found Instagram and TikTok, etc. And then realized from a label perspective and artist perspective that there's so much that you could do on those platforms, and it's kind of just led me down this path where I am right now.
Amazing. Welcome, Breyner. And I think when I was looking at like who you'd worked with before, I saw like Jessie Ware, Bashmore, Disclosure, like, you know, some amazing artists. So I think there's probably a lot to learn from you.
Thanks, mate.
And then handing it over to Steph. So Steph works for us here at Unheard. Steph, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Steph. I've been at Unheard 3 years almost. I think I'm 10 days out from that, actually. It's coming up. So I actually came in as an intern. I'm now a project manager across our selector of artists and manage the campaigns day to day. I guess a little bit of background. I've always been somewhat involved in music. Early days from like a fan perspective, when it was common for artists to have like street teams and like social media fandoms, etc. So yeah, really learned the importance of like cultivating a strong and like really committed fan base, and also what caused the fan base to emerge. Then I guess like my more formal training would be like music business at UCLA. That was a very fun year. Spent some time at First Access, freelanced for hurd to look after like huge titles and brands. So yeah, I guess I'm chronically online. I'm exposed to how artists are engaging fans and bringing in new fans, just chronically exposed to it all.
Love that, Steph. And I think it's fair to say you're our resident stan. So we learn a lot from you.
Yes, super fan, always.
And then throwing it over to Gilo, last but not least, manager of House of Pharaohs, Samwise, and a lot more. So Gilo, do you want to give a quick intro?
So Gilo, manager of House of Pharaohs and a few others. Run Click Management. We've got our publishing company in-house, distribution in-house now. We actually outsource marketing to Unheard, and yeah, project manage a bunch of stuff. Look after athletes and artists alike. So yeah.
Amazing. And Gilo, I just want to stick with you following that introduction, you know, because when I think about artists like Samwise, House of Pharaohs, I do feel like there's a really strong artist identity that sits within those artists. So for you, how would you define what an artist identity is, and why is it important for artists like Sam?
That's a good question, you know. For us, artist identity is, I always say it's from within, innit? I think it's something that you draw from within the artist and, you know, bring it to the forefront of their audience to be able to consume. Because I often say that the same interests that you as the artist have, there's probably a fair few in your audience that have a similar interest. So unless you are comfortable with drawing from that and identifying that, and at the end of the day, celebrating and putting it out there to the forefront, you're not going to be able to find those touch points for people to relate to you with. But once you do, then it could be anything from enjoying anime or enjoying UFC or something like that. And there's probably a segment of your audience that enjoys that too. So trying to find ways to authentically relate that to your artist identity, and at the same time make that a touch point for your audience to be able to interact with you as well.
It's a great point, and I think the authenticity piece is like key. You know, I think especially now audiences can see right through that. You know, if you're not being authentic, it's really challenging to cut through. Breyner, what's been your experience with kind of you know, defining artist identity and why it's important? Do you have any examples maybe of the artists you've worked with who have that great artist identity?
Yeah, I mean, sure, definitely. I think kind of harking back to what you mentioned earlier, Alex, I guess with like Jessie Ware, I think Jessie, extremely talented singer, songwriter, you know, live performer, just absolute funny person to know as well. But you know, at the time when we'd started working with Jessie at PMR Records, she was still very fresh on, and you know, the full visual identity wasn't just there just yet. So you know, that took some soul searching from within herself of like, who did she want to be from a performance perspective, and also actually being given the chance to really shine this really spotlight on I guess a persona that she hadn't really been able to you know to let free really. And so from Jessie's perspective at that time, you know, she's a massive fan of soulful divas such as like Diana Ross, to Grace Jones, etc. So that was just her really finally getting to that position of like, oh, I'm actually an artist. Like I can actually take these ideas of how I think my music sounds and how does that look and relate into real life. So like something like that, you know, it takes months of work, but it's honestly, it's actually actualizing like who you really are as an artist and as a person. I think sometimes in you know, in day-to-day life, like as humans, you know, not all of us get to wear and be our true selves when we're out and about, just, you know, for different reasons. So when you're an artist, you realize like realistically the limits don't exist, you know, for your visual identity. It's about, I think the way it's kind of considered is like, you know, if you were to be a superhero, what would your costume be essentially? So I think that's how we always looked at it. So Jessie's evolution from the first album Devotion to now, I think it's still seamlessly, you know, like she has the amazing big hairdos that she does, some really great iconic dresses, and that's just been a thorough line of her continuing to evolve and continuing to find herself. I think another example as well for us at Blackstar is one actor I worked with is Def Leppard, and you know, massive rock band in the 80s, iconic everywhere. But they wanted something fresh and new for when they released their new album Diamond Star Halos. So that again, it's kind of like, how do we reinvent the wheel with what are you guys interested in this at this point in time? And they were really and we worked across with the label, and they were really into flash tattoos at that moment in time. So that became a big part of that creative. And then it's like, how do we dress you guys now? Because what you used to wear back then, you're not going to wear now. So it's being all very considered to the point of like, okay, cool. Like we need to show the tasteful evolution that we've gone through, because no one stays the same essentially. And so even though they have an iconic logo, you know, everything else needs to be branded, the videos to the styling to the album art to how we doing content on social media. You know, it's the way I like to look at it. And one thing I've said to someone before on the panel is that they came to me and said that they had this imaginary band, which is kind of like a gorillas thing that they were working on, and how best to kind of portray the characters. And I asked them a simple question. I said, what does the main singer of the band have for breakfast? And they took that away, and purely it's, I mean, you know, your visual identity is everything. You know, why do we know that Tyler the Creator loves bacon and waffles? Because he's made that a part of his visual identity and branding. So it's everything that you're really into. Like Gilo said, it's you know, if you love anime and Naruto, bring that in. You know, it's everything.
I love that. I love that. And I love that question that you asked, which is so simple to an artist, right? It's like, what are you interested in? You know, because like, I think when we speak to artists at Unheard, often it's kind of they're interested in creating music and it's hip hop music or whatever type of music it is. But and then it's going that level deeper, isn't it? It's like really getting personal to say, no, like, what are your interests outside of just the music? And when you said about what do you have for breakfast, sorry, slight tangent, is I defaulted to thinking about Samwise. I think in the Town Down video where his head's coming out of a bowl of cereal or something. I think I might, maybe I've got that wrong or right, but that's such a strong visual.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
And then,
but it's
Steph,
bang on. It's bang on. I love that question.
yeah, it's so powerful. It's so simple but powerful. And then Steph, you know, just want to kind of take it one step forward. And you know, we've talked a bit like about what an artist identity is, but why is that important?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just to echo the guys, it takes a long time to build, and it is like, it takes a long time to figure it out essentially, and it's always evolving. It can evolve. But I think where it becomes super important is that it adds like intention and direction to campaigns and to the artists themselves. It allows you to build like a really cohesive brand that people can recognize and connect with as well. And it informs things like what content should you be creating? What should you be saying like yes and no to? And something that I heard and I like keep in mind is that actually like marketing gets you attention, but branding keeps that attention. I think that sums it up.
Love that. That's very cool. And Breyner, I just want to drop back to you quickly because of that question that you asked, which again is so simple, but like, what is it that interests you as an artist? And you start to build out brand identity from there. So my question is kind of leading on from that is, what are some big things artists should consider when building that identity?
I think in terms of authenticity, I think, I think always the first thing I'll do is like think about what do you have easily accessible to yourself that is a true reflection of yourself. Because I think sometimes, especially in the current world that we live in, I think sometimes people think it's to create great visual branding for their artistry that they need a lot of money. It's not about that. It's about being creative to yourself and utilizing your interests and what you have available to you. So that's the first thing that I always go on. I think as well, just something super easy like a colorway. What are your colors? What are your textures? Like that's all that is free. Like colors are everywhere. Like just figure out which colors resonate with your music. Utilize that in your branding, because that becomes synonymous with you. I mean, greatest example right now is just Charlie XCX with that green. Like anytime anyone sees that green now, it's like, oh, it's Charlie. Super simple, super simple. Think about how does your name look? How is that written out? What font is that used? Like if you're making like metal, like you're probably gonna have something that's gonna be really, really sharp, kind of gothic looking sometimes, or even Old English. But let's say you're a rapper, and let's say you're a bit more of a rapper who makes fun records. You might have big bubble writing as the way you spell your name, So you've got to think about, so I guess sometimes it's a bit tricky for people to kind of figure out, but it's really just like if your music was in visual form, how does that look? So your colors, the text, the textures, and also to just how you dress. Like honestly, I think that says a lot about where you're coming from and where your music is. What's the intent of your music? I also think sometimes the juxtaposition of how people dress and their music is also a great way to go about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my first three really.
I love that. And when you said the juxtaposition there, I remember seeing like Saint John, the US like hip hop R&B artist, wearing like snakeskin boots and like tight jeans. I was like, I actually love that. I think that's like so engaging.
And also now that's like in fashion, all that stuff now as well. So it's just about setting yourself apart.
Yeah, 100%. And Gilo, just in terms of kind of the artists that you've worked with over the last 5-10 years, what are some great examples where you've seen your artists kind of start to build their identity and, the questions maybe that they've asked themselves or you've asked them to start to identify things that they can double down on? And then how have you seen that play out as they build that identity?
I think something that Breyner said that was like bang on as well is that it changes, it never stays the same. And that's something, especially when you're working with a career artist or group or whatever, that you have to be aware of. And almost what I treat it as is kind of like how when Microsoft or whatever update their logos and stuff like that, it kind of happens every 10 so years. And similarly with an artist, the identity kind of changes decade by decade because 10 years for one person, a lot's going to change. But a good example of where I've seen that is probably with House of Pharaohs, where we started making music at 16, releasing it at 16, and then, we find ourselves at, 22, 23, and we're not doing the same things we were doing at 16. And by just understanding like how would you describe what it is you're doing in the sense of like what is the feeling, what is the like what is the feeling you want people to feel, what is the message you're trying to transmit, and try to get that into a one-liner. We done that and we came up with Freedom for the Rebellious, which really felt fitting for us because there was a lot of like counterculture, a lot of the time wanting to feel freedom by doing things in the fashion that we want, and having a rebellious nature in terms of wanting to question the traditional methods of how certain things are done. So that's probably a really good example. And in terms of another example of that, I'd say potentially Sam Wise, because coming from a collective with such a strong visual identity, it's now not how do I set myself apart from everybody else in the industry, but how do I set myself apart from the collective that I'm from, but without, looking like I'm shunning the collective or anything like that. So, and it's something we still refine today, but it's ultimately it requires a lot of self-awareness. And if you don't have it, trying to develop that in that sense. So I don't know, something for Sam's been working out for years, but it's until he's aware to know that wait, everybody else like enjoys working out, or those that don't work out want to work out, and I can kind of just push that through my brand. And now every Sunday people link up to do calisthenics with him. It attaches another touch point for him to be able to speak to his brand through. So yeah.
Well, I love that. I love that. And I love that it moves away from music, and that's where you can find kind of that authentic connection. And just bouncing off that word, kind of authenticity, and I guess like vulnerability, and coming to you, Steph, when I think about artists who are using like the Unheard platform, or just generally artists that are out there, and even myself, I think it's really hard to be vulnerable and authentic, especially in the public eye, because you're subject to like critique. You might feel that like doing certain things might get a certain reaction. Like how do you think you can kind of encourage that from artists to get comfortable with that authenticity and vulnerability? Because I think a lot of artists struggle with that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think just as an artist, like you just have to believe in your project and what you're doing. I think if you're going to create a persona, then maybe you can curate that a bit more, the same way people buy into like movie characters or whatever, like that's fine. But I think if you're not looking for that to be a career-long persona, and you're really just trying to put yourself out there, then just it's an extension of your self-identity. I think maybe just finding like, I can't remember who mentioned it, one of the guys mentioned like, it's a catchphrase, it's that one thing that sums it all up. So Charlie XCX, I feel like, is just a case study of the summer right now. But yeah, it's a bright summer. It's the color green. It's the font on like all the albums. It's the tweets. It's the merch. So she's bought into this brand. She's bought into this project. Like, this is what bright summer is. Another example is, guys in the office, when I'm a big Camila Cabello fan, like, see, XOXO is Miami. Like, and then when you go deeper, it's fast cars. It's the beach. It's a melting pot of sounds. The merch as well. Like, there's beach towels. So all of this just creates this world. But I think ultimately it's like, you have to believe in that world. You have to believe in this project in this moment in time. It can change. It might be different in a year or two, but just literally thinking of, and I like to look at it from a sensory point of view as well. It's like, what can you see? What can you hear? What can you touch? What can you feel? What can you taste? And building the world based on all of that so that people can really step into it with you.
I love that. I love the taste as well, because I know like Ed Sheeran's got his like hot sauce, and like you can see more and more artists moving into this. And Steph, just sticking with you, because I just want to kind of draw that point out a little bit. And this is maybe touching on something Breyner said earlier in terms of the juxtaposition actually between your interest in your brands and your music. Like, do you think it's important that there's like a thread or an alignment between the sound and the visual, or actually do you think you can play on that and you can pull them further apart and it still work?
I think it depends on the sound and the visual. Sometimes you can, like, you know, Ed Sheeran was wearing casual clothes, but then he had rappers and he was freestyling, and it was novel at the time, so people loved it. But like, if we go back to Charlie, if Charlie was sitting in like a cottage in the English countryside drinking a peppermint tea, that's not Brett. That's a different project. That wouldn't work. So in that case, yeah, I think like the messaging has to be consistent. That thread has to be there. It has to somewhat make sense. Like the visuals have to make sense with what you're saying in this project and overall.
Amazing. And Breyner, you gave some great kind of examples of artists you've worked with before where you've built, you know, amazing brands that are instantly kind of recognizable. Could you talk about maybe some challenges you faced with kind of building an artist's identity and brands, and perhaps how you've overcome them in the end? Or not?
Challenges. I mean, I think sometimes, I think ultimately with artists, I think no one's going to really know their visual and brand identity better than them. But sometimes, you know, you might have an artist who has absolutely no idea of what they want their visual and branding to represent. So, you know, I think challenges like that are really, really hard, because I think everyone always has different ideas of what music sounds like. So you kind of utilize the music to try to figure out the direction. So a challenge that presents is, you know, you do a bunch of research, you collate mood boards for people, and then you send that over, and then they completely feel like it's not them. And my thing is always not about pushing things or forcing things onto people, because I think, you know, again, back to authenticity, if it's not authentic to them, like, it's not going to work. It's like when you see people dressing a certain way and you realize you're not comfortable wearing like those super baggy jeans, dude, like, you know. So that's a challenge that we face quite a lot. But I think over time, when you start to give artists the tools of like, maybe you should go and do a dive on like some artists that you like. What is it that you like about their visual branding? How would you apply that to yourself? You know, I think that's always the great thing to do, just to give people homework, because, you know, as much as an artist's job is mainly about the music, I think more so nowadays, I mean, even just back to the 80s when MTV kind of came out and you had Michael Jackson really, you know, amping up his visuals. Like, it's an important part because, as Steph says, you know, they need to go hand in hand. So that's one challenge we face. And then also, I think, just back to like budgetary stuff, you know, sometimes you come up with some really great ideas, and artists really get into it and they come up with some great ideas, but sometimes the budget just doesn't allow for that idea to be done. So another challenge there is just figuring out in a creative way, how can we execute this? And more often than not, actually, being quite strategic and creative with a lower budget usually provides the best results, because you know, it's just like with anything else. Like, when you're forced to have a small pot, you're going to figure out, who owes me a favor here? How can I do that, but in a very unique and cheeky kind of way? Like, you know, you need to start just figuring out different ways to be resourceful. So that's two challenges.
Love that. And a question that popped into my head there, you were mentioning a few things around kind of authenticity, and then also kind of, I guess, touching on the point around semi-manufacturing, you know, an artist identity. And then I was listening to an interview, I think it was with Central C and on the GQ like channel, and he said, the brand you see on social media is not the real me. You know, so do you think there's an element of like, actually you can, if you're not comfortable being vulnerable, you can manufacture this artist persona, and you can then kind of be two separate people? Like, is that something that actually a lot of artists end up doing?
I mean, I can't say that for all artists, but I mean, it's not too surprising sometimes. I mean, you know, I think that's a wider context for everyday life in general. You know, how many people showcase their lows on social media? Not many, but everyone's always showing the highlights, you know. So just as I mentioned earlier, like, you know, some people aren't allowed to be their true selves in day to day of like how they want to appear or how they want to dress and stuff. You know, so you put on a mask. I mean, that's not too dissimilar with like social media. And I think sometimes, well, in this world of like attention economics, you know, you get people who do some really, really outlandish stuff online for clicks. but then you realize outside of that, that's not really them. They're just doing it for attention. So I think, persona, I think this goes back to Steph saying about personas. Like, yeah, some artists have amazing personas, which are actually very, very calculated down to a T, and they work really, really well. But I guess the downside of that sometimes is some people sometimes feel lost in in who they are, especially like if you're someone who's a big name, you're constantly being perceived as this one person. When you're finally alone with your family and like close friends, you probably just want to show off, just be the person that you can't be anymore, because sometimes you realize that the audience that you have probably wouldn't accept you for that. But then I think that's why authenticity is important.
Yeah, so true. Brilliant. And then Gila, I want to throw it over to you. And thanks, Breyner. That was super interesting, actually. I want to throw it over to you in terms of, obviously there are things that you can do in terms of working with like brands or sync or placements, to make sure that you're elevating your music and your awareness, but can also then enhance your brand, like really reaffirm where you sit. Like, could you talk maybe a little bit around how you have seen your artists or other artists working with brands to really kind of double down on their artist identity via sync or partnerships or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think when you get into those spaces, as Brayden said, that's where authenticity is super important, because you can then become lost in it, because if you don't, like, it takes a high level of skill to create a character and be able to live through that character, particularly as a real person, not like in a movie or anything like that, and be able to carry that out consistently and understand, that character's interest, that character's personality, that character's temperament is a bit different. So unless you're highly skilled, it's really difficult to do. And I say that in relation to the sync and brand stuff, where if you're not able to remain consistent in that, it will reflect in the type of opportunities that you accept, really, in it. So, and I think, what we've been able to do with our acts is, remain authentic. I think there is an element of, okay, Samwise is the character. Samuel, when you're at home, it's not too dissimilar. Accentuating certain aspects of Samwise that are already there in Samuel, but we know that will sell for the audience of Samwise. And with the brand stuff, is finding brands that align with genuine interests. His interest of food, his interest of traveling, or interest of athleticism and working out. So something we've been able to do. A TV show we got synced on recently was Atlanta, a show that we've all been watching, and it was just fitting in terms of when they came into London and who they were visiting, for them to be able to sync the track to the background. But I think only by being authentic was that opportunity made available to us, and us being fit into it, and like it being a really exciting moment. But if you manufacture a character, that moment could align with what you should do with that character, and you take that opportunity, it won't align with your audience overall. So, yeah.
Love that, Gilo, and congrats on the Atlanta sync. I think that's amazing. I'm a big fan. And Steph, I just wanted to throw it over to you. Are there any kind of brand partnerships or kind of syncs that you've seen in the last few years that have stood out to you as being really impressive, really well aligned, and almost like cultural moments, I guess you could say?
I think, do you know what? I think Kat Burns has actually done really, really well with like her brand partnerships. Like everything is super aligned. She did New Balance and recently as well. So I think, yeah, everything Kat Burns. Honestly, they've hit the nail on the head with her. And let me see. If we go back to Camila, like she's just done Bacardi, which makes sense. Like Bacardi are putting monies into that campaign, essentially. So that's on like a big scale, but it makes sense with the album. It makes sense with Miami. It makes sense with her Cuban roots, etc. So yeah, I like those.
Love that. Thanks, Steph. And I'm just going to pause here for 1 second because our participants haven't asked any questions yet. But if you've got any questions, I've got one more question for the guys, and I'm going to throw it around to all of them. And then we will be taking any questions that you want to ask. So stick them in the chat, and we will be able to come to you in about 5 minutes. So, guys, I've got one last question, and I'm going to kind of throw it around to each and every one of you one at a time. Breyner, I'll start with you if that's okay. But thinking about our artist community and the communities that we all work with, what are steps that these artist communities can take if they're struggling with their brand identity straight away to start to be able to understand and build that?
I'd say take some time and just experience life. I think there isn't a better teacher than actually just living life and being in the moment. You can walk down the road, see a poster for something, and you go, oh shit, I really, really like the way that this is made. I like the colors used on this. I like the images. You go into the park, you'll see some colors. Like, honestly, there's just you can get inspiration from things that you see that you feel are disparate, that have no relation to music at all. But just actually being able to maneuver in the real world and just take that breather from thinking, setting time and being like, I'm going to figure out my artist identity now. Just go out into the real world, honestly. Like, I feel like that's the best way to kind of just be with your thoughts and actually realize what's out in the world that you can already take inspiration from. So I think that would be the first one.
I love that. And I'm hoping now we see artists walking around kind of King's Cross with a pen and paper, just like looking around, trying to take notes. But it's a great point. And I think, again, it goes back to like things that you do in your day-to-day life and things that mean something to you, I think. Gilo, I can see you're outside, but can I throw it over to you now to answer the same question? So like anything artists can do right now.
Anything artists can do right now to be able to strengthen that identity. Yeah, I don't know if Brain is stealing my points, but it's very similar to that, where I'm inspired by everything in life, I don't know. It could be like, I think I was on the tube and there was a dad with his kids, and the way he was dressed, I was like, you're looking kind of fly, like, but you wouldn't really know it. So I'm thinking, okay, cool. If I was an artist, how could I incorporate that into my style? It's everyday people that are the people that decide what's a hit, basically. So then if you can almost imitate what people are seeing in their day-to-day life as well, you're going to have a lot more ability. And I think, as I said at the beginning, self-awareness is a key part of that. Honestly, taking the time to ask yourself the difficult questions, like, who am I? Like, if you've been through a trauma, how does this trauma affect me? How does it make me like manifest myself when I'm in a day-to-day life? My heritage, or literally understand. You have to kind of understand where you're from in order to know where you're going in that sense. So really understanding, like yourself is the best way to have the strongest artist identity. Because then if you do it from an authentic place, as we've been saying, then it's going to come across that. So I'd say the best thing you can do is take the time and ask yourself the difficult questions. It might feel more personal than professional, but like that's what's going to help you in your professional career.
Love that. Thanks, Gilo. And Steph?
Yeah, just very aligned with what Gilo and Breyner are saying. Like, it's living a little bit, actually taking the time to observe like life and things happening around you. Asking like friends and family like what they love about you, what immediately makes them think of you outside of music, even like, I don't know, maybe it's the car you drive, and or maybe you just wear this one brand, or maybe like, you watch this one type of like film or sitcom all the time. Like there will be little things that they've picked up that'll be like, oh yeah, this reminds me of this person. And I think like, and if you're struggling, like sometimes it's just about starting with the one thing that is very much you. As Breyner said, it can be a color. As Gilo was saying, it might be a style. Like just start with that one thing that's you and run with that. Because I feel like once you get comfortable understanding what's you, it allows, space for you to actually decide what else is you, what else can be part of your world. And yeah, just getting super specific with things as well. Like be like, I like this, I like that. And then finding a way to piece it together.
Love that. Thank you so much, guys. And do you know what I'd say to the people that have joined this call, to the artists that have joined this call, is that fair play to you, because I think that, for example, when we do like a playlisting masterclass or an ads masterclass, you know, these are things that can have that immediate impact on your streams, but actually aren't great when it comes to building a career. You know, it's the artist brand identity stuff, which is arguably like harder to get your head around, and artists are slightly less interested in it sometimes, that is actually going to help you build that career. So for those guys that have joined and are watching this back on YouTube, I think it's a great first step in kind of creating a professional persona, and it shows that, you know, you really do want to build a career as an artist. So massive thank you to Gilo, Breyner, Steph for joining and sharing their wisdom. I learned so much. That was actually great. We'll share a recording of this masterclass afterwards. We'll share a discount code to the Unravel product, and we'll also pop this on YouTube. But for now, guys, thank you so much for your time, and you've been great, and see you soon.
Thank you, guys.
No problem, man.